I moved the mic. Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night, 7:11 p.m. Central. We're all still alive, barely, and still moshing to the apocalypse. As far as the hurricane, I've been looking at that, man. It's horrible. It went right by us. I mean, it skirted us. Where I'm in Graceville, Florida, and the outer band went right over us, and it just rained and flooded. But I went through Michael, so I was scared shatless as you're watching it always coming. So we were in the direct cone at first, but it started to move over, and then it just skirted us. But it was so weird because there was no wind until later, and not very much wind, but it went over us, just not the cone. It was just like one of the bands, the outer bands, like I'd say 3 or 4 bands that went over us. But part of me was like, I wanted the wind, and then I felt bad because no, I don't. But I like the windy feeling when they happen, but not when they're dangerous, of course. I was in the center of Michael when it went over a mobile home. I was in the bathtub with a dog, and my dog Jack, he's passed now in a Bible, and Jack, as the core passed over Marianna, Florida. And I actually stepped out in the middle of it and didn't realize that I did. And then when it started to move a little, and I went inside and looked at, I guess, the stuff and realized I was in the middle of it. And it was creepy, like just silent creepiness in the center. But I've been looking at all the damage. It's terrifying. And it reminds me of Michael. So, but anywho, we got,
I actually know several people who are in it. Yeah. Like in Asheville, like, you know.
Wham, have you heard from them?
Yes. Everyone I know has been able to check in, but everyone that I know has lost everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really awful.
I've seen some of the pictures. It's crazy.
It's really bad.
Well, prayers to all those people out there going through it and who are still, especially Michael Carter. We've had him on before, and hope to get him on again sometime when his Fridays get free one year. But I hope he's surviving. And let's see here. We got Steve Ward with us here tonight. The return of Steve Ward. He's been on before a little while back. Great to have you here, Steve.
Great to be back.
Good to have you here. Let me plug these things real fast. I forgot to do it, and then we'll get started. I'll be real fast. They're actually cool things, luckily. So there's some books from Harper Teen, I guess. They seem like they're for adults too, but they have a Clive Barker blurb on them, the guy that wrote Hellraiser. So, but I mean, I guess he can plug that kind of stuff too. Clown in a Cornfield by Adam Caesar, Cesare. There's 3 books. Clown in a Cornfield, Clown in a Cornfield 2, Friendo Lives, and Clown in a Cornfield 3, The Church of Friendo. And let's see what the Clive Barker little thing he says. An Arthur who knows how to make us afraid. Clive Barker. That's a hell of a blurb right there, for sure. From Clive Barker, the Hellraiser dude. And what else? Swords of the North, that Robert Howard book we talked with Jeffrey Shanks about from Titan Comics, who was in one of the writers of Savage Sword of Conan. The new comics all coming out because Titan owns the rights to Conan now, and Marvel doesn't anymore. But the Robert Howard Foundation sent me Swords of the North, which is a new book of a lot of his old stuff that's Norse. So you can get that on Amazon, Swords of the North. It's basically the Conan dude writing Viking stuff. So that's pretty freaking cool for sure. But that's on Amazon and Swords of the North. One last thing, a video game from Steam, Rogue Waters. If you want a weird kind of a turn-based strategy pirate game with ships, and it's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, but it's doing really well. It just came out. They're I think they're in Sweden or they're overseas, but it's doing well. It's called Rogue Waters, and I think it's in early access, but it looks pretty good. Check it out if you need a pirate game. Those are rare and hard to come by. So great to have everybody here tonight. Oh, one last thing. I found out a friend of mine passed away, and there's been so many people passing away lately. It's just like, it's creepy and depressing at the same time. And Jason Wilson, of course, from the network, he passed away recently. But a friend of mine, Jade Nelson, I found out he passed away, and I just want to say a little tribute to him, a memorial. He was one of the friends of mine in my wilder days after my dad died, and after I went through testicular cancer and all that, and then my dad died, I kind of went crazy with heavy metal and drugs and all that stuff, and doing pretty good now, just on the pot, Florida medicinal representing. But anywho, he was one of the guys that I remember. God, it was crazy because I'm someone that tries to avoid conflict, especially crazy stuff like against a gang. Uh, there was we were at a crystal, and he was with this African American girl, and I guess they were together and kissing or something, and he upset like a whole gang of black dudes with a car with bullet holes in it. And I came out of the crystal. This was a long ass time ago, in my early 20s. If it happened to me now, I'd be in the hospital with a heart attack. But anywho, I went outside the crystals, and they're beating him up, like just pounding on him. And I just reached in my back pocket, pulled out my junior deputy badge, and go, police. And one of them came up to me and hit me once. The rest ran, and they ran away. And I'd never done that before. I don't even know why I had that. It was just a stupid, like, dumb thing that I did really quick that could have probably killed me, but luckily it had the opposite effect. But it stopped him from getting pounded. And I was just surprised. It was one of those situations where he died a little while ago, and I didn't know. And I went to his wall to say happy birthday, and you're like, oh, well, he's croaked. So that's depressing. But to Jade, hopefully you're in the afterlife, and we'll catch up with you again, and hopefully not out of weird crystals with that kind of activity, something a little more heavenly for sure. But good to have everybody here. The Mothman Festival. So what is your connection to that, Steve? What's the story of that? How are you hooked up to it?
Well, these days, I actually live in West by God, Virginia. I live on the same road that the Scarberries and the Mallets were chased back on November 15th, 1966. I started coming down to the Mothman Festival about 2006 when I was still living up in Michigan. I've been down here for 2.5 years. So I was just back in those days, I was just a happy-go-lucky attendee, catching the fever, everything with Mothman on it, T-shirts, trinkets, whatever. I would buy it. But as the years went on, I became more and more absorbed. And now I am working behind the scenes. I help set up the creepy crawlies, the giant spiders with red eyes in the TNT area. I do one of the tour guides on Saturday night. I do things like sometimes I speak there occasionally. I am the MC usually for the speakers. So I have been completely absorbed in the Mothman Festival to the point where I actually don't get a chance to actually cruise it too much and check out all the tables and everything. I'm too busy being responsible and helping support it.
That's a cool connection to have for sure. So I guess to get to the bones of it, I mean, there's so many different things we hear about Mothman, so many different perceptions. And I love these stories. Like I do a lot of work with, small town monsters. I try to get them on as much as possible because I love the idea of the creepiness, the Stephen Kingness of it, of a town having these encounters and just all crazy breaking loose, Yeah. Just in those documentaries, Small Town Monsters, they embrace there's so many towns that have weird stuff. But what was your first thoughts on Mothman, and what do you kind of lean towards it being, or is it still a mystery?
Well, when I was in junior high in Michigan, this was November of 1966, that first major sighting took place, November 15th. When whatever it was chased two couples out of what they call the TNT area north of Point Pleasant. There was an area where they made explosives during World War II. And it was there weren't many. There was still some structures standing in the 60s, but if you look at the old black and white photographs in the 1940s, it was quite a complex. Well, in that year, in 1966, in Michigan, we had a UFO flap in March, and that was where Dr. J. Allen Hynek came down from Project Blue Book when he was still attached to that, and declared that some of the sightings might be swamp gas. Of course, that's all the press needed to hear, and so that was kind of a big deal. Although he had at that point he had begun to believe that there was something very odd. I mean, he had begun to believe the people that were experiencing these things, that they were really experiencing something extraordinary. But then the following November, that's when the Mothman showed up. So 1966 was a pretty big year for me. And I guess I've been, in a way, following the Mothman ever since, to the point where I'm even living down here now on the very same road that the Scarberries and the Mallets were chased out of the TNT area back on November 66.
And you work at the museum too.
Yes, on Saturdays I show up there. I greet people. I answer their questions and so forth. If they want their photograph taken by the infamous Mothman statue, I can do that, and they don't have to send the kid out. They don't like very much to take the family picture. I can take the whole family.
Okay, so there's the photos people can take, like you were saying, the family photos in front of the Mothman. Some want to get photos of the shiny hiney, but
Yes.
you also get the Mothman cam. What's the
Yes.
story with that? So that's more
Well,
photography.
well, if you're standing in front of the Mothman statue, and you look up to the second story, you will see an infamous man in black, actually a mannequin in black, staring at you. And then I take people around to the back, and they will see the infamous shiny hiney. And sometimes they'll do very terrible things back there. I can't repeat out loud, and then I tell them, see that black dot up there by the man in black? That's our 24/7 moth cam. That means people right now all over the world on the internet just saw you, whatever it was, take a picture or slap Mothman's caboose, and they always get a kick out of it. So it's people really, really enjoy it. And Jeff Wamsley, who has created the Mothman Museum and also is the co-founder of the Mothman Festival, he has created a phenomenal museum with clippings that go way back to that time period, memorabilia from the film The Mothman Prophecies, various displays that talk about the men in black and so forth. So it's he's done a phenomenal job at putting all that together. And of course, he was about 6 years old when all this happened. I think he was 6 when he was playing in his basement as a kid with his toys, that he actually heard the collapse of the Silver Bridge that occurred 13 months to the day that those two couples were chased by whatever this thing was, December 15th, 1967.
And what topics about the Mothman have you sought the most? I mean things that come to mind, the Indrid Cold thing, and there's so many different variations of that. And then you had the whole Mothman movie with Richard Gere. That was actually pretty good. I need to watch that again sometime. I don't know how accurate it was, but it was an interesting watch. But what are some of the things about the Mothman, the weird things that stand out to you? Is Indrid Cold one of them?
Well, it certainly is. But before I get to that, people that experienced this thing, people ask me what the Mothman was, and I go through the litany of the strange behavior of this thing. Some people that saw it was about 6-7 foot tall, red glowing eyes, 10-foot wingspan. It didn't always flap its wings when it took off or flew. A lot of people experienced an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena when they saw this thing after they went home. There was a preacher and his wife, the Grays, that saw this thing actually manifest in their home. And this was when the whole thing was starting. They didn't know what this was. The next day they were leaving for a faraway country to be missionaries. when they came back several years later, they looked at the old newspapers and they thought, my God, that's what we saw in our room. Some people, an unnamed banker and Linda Sigmund, they both had missing time when they experienced this thing. So it's very difficult to pin down what it was. And I've actually told people that perhaps it was something like an elemental or something, very elusive. Now, the Indrid Cold is a whole nother bizarre set of circumstances. That actually started a few days before the Mothman outbreak took place. And here's my cat here, named Keel, by the way. Oh, he decided to make an appearance. It actually started with an unnamed individual that contacted Mary Hyre. Now, Mary Hyre was the reporter, friend and colleague of John Keel. She had a column called Where the Waters Mingle, and she was one that reported on things like the Mothman sightings, UFOs, and Men in Black, and so forth. And she didn't really seem to care that people, were criticizing her for it. And she was approached by a man that said that he had been driving down Route 77, and this elongated craft landed, and this individual came out, and he had kind of just a really bizarre conversation. I mean, if this guy was from off-world or some kind of an alien, it was a very mundane conversation. And he said, it's driving me crazy. I've started to drink. I have to tell somebody about this. So he was going to come forward with this report, and John Keel was in on it. And finally, he said, you know what? We think we're not going to go ahead with this. And John Keel said, well, why? He said, well, that scientist fella said we should just forget all about it. And Keel said, what scientist fella? And he said, well, I don't know, but he seemed to know what he was talking about. And Keel said, well, how did he find out about this since you haven't told anybody except me and Mary Hyre? And he said, damned if I know. And then a couple of days later, Woodrow Derenberger claimed to have a very similar experience, apparently with no connection to this man. When he was driving down Route 77, this craft kind of landed and kind of eased his truck over to the side of the road. And he had this conversation, another pointless conversation that didn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if this thing was this guy was from off-world with all this advanced knowledge, it was kind of a very boring, mundane conversation. And he told Derenberger his name was Indrid Cold. And supposedly he had other contacts with this whatever. So it's just certainly later on, Derenberger, I'm sure he embellished some of these encounters, but and there were other people that claimed very Indrid Cold-like encounters. So it's really an enigma. I don't know. It's hard to know what to make of it. There was a woman in Gallipolis, Ohio, a few months later, that was having all kinds of bizarre stuff happening on her farm. Now, Gallipolis is right across the river from Point Pleasant, right across the Ohio River. And she was having classic haunting phenomena. Her son was seeing these large boxcar-like craft flying over their farm. And she was having cattle mutilations. And she came out of the I think, a hospital. She was working as a nurse one time. And this craft came down that sounded very similar to an Indrid Cold type craft. And these two guys came out in coveralls, and another very uninteresting, pointless conversation. And she was she was paralyzed at the time. She couldn't move. They went away, and then she went home, very upset. And then she said to John Keel, when he was interviewing her, she said, did that man, meaning Woodrow Derenberger, ever see, meaning Indrid Cold, again? And Keel said, well, he said he did. And she said, well, I saw them again. A few days later, she said she saw them in street clothes walking in downtown Gallipolis, and one of them kind of nodded at her like, we've seen each other before. So it's really, really hard to know what to make of some of these incredible encounters. But they were just they fill the scene in not just the Ohio Valley. Keel encountered a lot of bizarre incidents, even up in Long Island, where he was living at the time. So, it's very hard to know what to make of all this.
So the lady having the encounters, was she at a ranch, or what was it? Something like a ranch that she was at having encounters?
It was a farm. It was a
Okay.
farm, and I don't know. Unfortunately, we don't know where that was.
Yeah, I'm always trying to figure that out with the Skinwalker Ranch stuff, and then they have the Beyond Skinwalker show. It's like they're going to all these ranches, and all the same
Right.
stuff's kind of happening. So I'm always trying to figure out what's up with the ranches. Like, obviously, there's something that's up with it, but
Right.
yeah. But like I said, with those shows, the biggest things creepier than the paranormal phenomenon at the Skinwalker
Yeah.
Ranch shows are all the government spooks there. That's what's so creepy about those shows. But there's definitely something about ranches. I've heard from Stacy Brown, who's been on Finding Bigfoot, and him and his dad, who's passed now. They got some footage down here in the Panhandle of Florida, that there's some ranches down here in Florida that the people are having stuff like that, but they don't want nobody to know because it'll hurt business, so they can't say the name. They're trying to do it anonymously or something.
Right.
I'm always trying to figure out why the ranches or farm. I guess because it's just land and there's a lot of crap under land. So, it's earth. So I guess that's the big reason, but just always trying to figure it out.
It seems like this stuff is going on all over the place and just hasn't been reported.
And there was a weird show on Amazon. I haven't seen it yet. I think Josh Brolin's in it, and there's some kind of stuff going out on his farm that's kind of weird. I forget the name of it, Outer Range or something like that. I never watched it, but
Well,
definitely
Lee Hampel, who lives very close to the infamous Bray Road, where people have seen the dogmen, the upright canids. He's had a whole series of bizarre incidents going on there that he's actually captured on trap cameras. I mean, he's got thousands of pictures of odd phenomena.
What's his name again, so I can look him up?
Lee Hampel, near Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and near Bray Road. And I've been to his farm a few times. He will give a presentation of some of the bizarre stuff he's captured, from like weird technology in the sky to parts of some kind of an animal to bizarre footprints that start nowhere and split into two, like it's two creatures, and then end nowhere. It's just totally. He was on my show, the High Strangeness Factor, a couple of years back.
Yeah, I found them and saved the info. I want to look at those photos and stuff for sure. Check that out.
Unfortunately, he keeps a lot of them close to his vest, but he has allowed me to use a few of them that he has put up on Coast to Coast AM. They're just mind blowing.
The biggest thing about these experiences is when you see them, you want to see more. I've had a lot of different ones after I went through chemo and testicular cancer and lost a testicle when I was 17. And then my dad died a few years later. So I'm very interested in trauma. I think trauma has something to do with opening our senses. And that was a lot of trauma that opened my senses to seeing beings of light, UFOs seeming to appear at different houses I lived at that seemed to be focused where I lived at the house. And I didn't want to be too egomaniacal, but it seemed like because of me, and even people agreed with that. And then I saw a lot of different type beings. But once you see it now, it seems like they don't like me anymore. I'll see something once in a while, but now you want to see it more and you don't. But those are my oldie sightings, I call them.
They may not like me at all. I very seldom have experienced anything odd, and that's fine with me. I will just take the reports from people that have stumbled onto these bizarre circumstances.
It definitely causes personality changes and PTSD. I believe that firmly, and other stuff that I can't explain. But just mostly it can alienate you, I think, a lot. Just having those kind of, just like, sounds funny to say alienate it with all of it, but there's something something to that.
It's a good word. It's a good word.
Yeah, definitely. And so what other cases are abound lately that you've heard of, like that are happening currently? I mean, what are some things that you've been hearing? We'd like just to hear news of this kind of stuff. We don't always get the chance to.
Not too much. I'm not tuned in to too many of the recent cases. My interest is patterns, connections, and parallels in the broad spectrum of the paranormal, whether it be different time periods, different parts of the globe, and even between different what we think of as different types of manifestations like cryptids, UFOs, and so forth. So yeah, I'm really not too. I mean, of course, we know that there's Marley Woods, which I'm sure is still going on. Ted Phillips was in on that. I think Southeast Missouri. He was a friend and colleague of Dr. J. Allen Hynek. But we've lost so many of these great people. He was watching. He was the kind of guy that analyzed I think hundreds and hundreds of trace landing cases, close encounters of the second kind. Friend and colleague again of Dr. J. Allen Hynek, and he got onto this area called that he nicknamed Marley Woods in southeastern Missouri, and he actually saw some of the phenomena for the first time himself. These balls of light separating and coming back together, and he heard about other experiences where people saw some kind of large white-haired dog-like creatures and so forth. So it's those areas, the Bridgewater Triangle, Skinwalker Ranch, and on that fascinate me. But I'm currently not too aware of any actually, I am aware of a place actually south of me, but I know very little about it. Another researcher contacted me about a family that was experiencing a lot of this stuff, and I hope to get in on it. It's not that far away, but I haven't heard anything lately. So I would love to be on the ground in one of these. I think I would love to be on the ground in one of these areas, witnessing some of this stuff. On the other hand, I might run screaming like a little girl once it actually presented itself. So I don't really know. I'm kind of untested when it comes to that.
Have you watched any of the Beyond Skinwalker Ranch episodes?
Yes, yeah, very very interesting. There seems to be patterns there that show up with some of these other areas, and it's hard to know how to put them together or what to make of them.
And then there's Chris Bledsoe with X-Men gear on, with the neurologist Colonel John Alexander and 2 CIA former spooks summoning light phenomenon. So it's like, what the hell is happening? It's weird. I've done some research on that UFO of God book, and a lot of people are under it on Amazon saying they're having similar experiences. It's kind of weird. Like I start thinking about John Carpenter movies and getting paranoid with it all. But some of that light phenomenon I've seen myself, and it seemed to have some kind of control over it. Like, will you move this way? And it would. And that's the kind of similar stuff. Now I can't do it, but a long time ago in my younger days, I had some similar phenomenon. But if you look up that UFO of God book, it's like doing like 5 stars in the Christian section on Amazon. It's pretty creepy. I started to read it, but didn't finish it, but it's pretty good. But it's just weird.
With John Carpenter movies, you're going to get a good soundtrack with it. That's the plus side.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt about it. And, but definitely, you got anything you'd like to add, Mark, or?
Yeah, sure. Steve, you were just talking about, your interest is in patterns. You said something about, how they appear over time. The Van Meter Visitor Festival is coming up this weekend. Is that right?
Actually, it was last weekend.
Oh, last weekend.
Iowa, yeah.
Okay. Are there patterns between the Van Meter Visitor and a little over 60 years later with the Mothman?
Well, the Van Meter Visitor was more of a sort of a pterodactyl-like creature. It just showed up 1 week at the end of September in 1903, and there were several prominent people in Van Meter that reported it. So it may be a legitimate case. It doesn't sound like it was a bunch of people that got together just to create a hoax or a newspaper story. It had the thing is, as I talked about the Mothman phenomenon, Mothman didn't act like a real animal. It didn't always flap its wings. Poltergeist phenomena, a lot of bizarre things surrounding the Mothman. Well, the Van Meter visitor, it had people that saw it. It had some kind of a horn on its beak, but it also gave off some kind of a light. One of the original witnesses that saw it on top of a building and thought it was a robber up there with a flashlight. Another individual that got close to it said it exuded some kind of a vapor. You can make your own joke there if you want, but he said that whatever it was a foul smell, and he actually lost some time. He didn't understand some of what happened. So this thing seemed to have, while it looked very much like a large pterodactyl and even acted like it a bit, it seemed to have some kind of bizarre aspects to it that were more paranormal. So it was more sort of Keelian, John Keelian, that is, than just a large creature. And the last sighting of it, they saw it with a smaller version of itself near the old coal mine toward the edge of town, and it seemed like it went in there and they never saw it again. So it wasn't directly connected to the Mothman, but it had these odd properties that suggested that there might be something more to it than just some kind of a flesh and blood unknown creature.
Oh, it is the could the TNT area and the coal mine be some kind of similar, sleeping habitat for these creatures?
I don't know that the TNT area was
The igloos.
right. They had of course they created explosives during World War II for the war effort. They stored them in 100 of these concrete igloos or bunkers, and it was very polluted. I don't know. I think that I don't know that there was any direct connection between the coal mine and the TNT area. These creatures or manifestations or whatever they are, it's very hard to try to understand what their origins are or if they have any real substance. It's almost like they come out of the Phantom Menagerie that Dr. Donald Oman talked about. So I'm not aware of any real connection between the TNT area and these old coal mines, but it's the answers on these things are very elusive.
Yeah, that's just one of the patterns that you bring up, and we talk, and you get other points of views. It's really a fascinating subject, and uh, even with you know, or are you aware of any other, besides the more recent Chicago Mothman sightings? Are there other pterodactyl, flying humanoid type creatures found further down the Ohio River Valley?
If you go back in the literature, we'll find cases of people that talk about thunderbirds or even creatures that are more pterodactyl-like.
Mhm.
I'm not well. Actually, if you go way back around World War II, a researcher named James Gay Jones wrote a book called Haunted Valley. He claims there were several reports of a large sort of a man bird. again around World War II, a little bit upriver around the Elk River area. These things had kind of a reddish plumage, men-like heads, 12-foot wingspan, and a lot of people supposedly saw them around the Elk River Valley, and they would keep their children indoors because they were afraid of what might happen. There's very little information on these things, but the source comes out of, again, The Haunted Valley by James Gay Jones. So it's another one of these. If you want to go back a little earlier to about 1904, there was another bridge collapse, not like so much like the Silver Bridge collapse of December 15th, 1967, but this was a smaller bridge. There were deaths, unfortunately, and it was over the Elk River. And the odd thing about it was it happened on December 15th, just like the Silver Bridge. Now, there's probably no connection, and it probably is a legitimate coincidence. But how bizarre is that? Two bridges collapsing in the same general geographic area, even though they're decades apart, on December 15th.
Wow. Cool stuff. Is there any relation to any of the many of the Ice Age animals found at the Big Bone Lick State Park?
Not that I'm aware of, and I don't know much about that, but I'm not sure that we can categorize Mothman as a real flesh and blood animal. It's almost something more like an elemental or something. I mean, it was just bizarre when people talked about the way it behaved or the way they responded to it. So I'm not. I don't know what the heck the Mothman was, but a lot of people saw that. John Keel talked to a little over 100 people that year, and generally they describe the same kind of creature: 6-7 foot tall, red glowing eyes, 10-foot wingspan. But also you mentioned the Chicago Mothman was mentioned. I'd be very cautious about the Chicago Mothman. A great researcher named Allison Jornlin a few years ago went back and explored many of these claims. And you know how when somebody makes up a report and they talk about the area, they get things wrong. They're not terribly accurate. Well, she found that situation with several of the reports, and also it's some of the initial reports of the Chicago Mothman came from, and I have two sources on this. The Mutual UFO Network said that they were getting reports from the same IP address, pretending to be different reports. So I think some of the Chicago Mothman stuff is questionable. So I've now, while some of the stuff may be very legitimate, I have tended to stay away from that because there seems to be a lot of problems with that.
Yeah,
so
we've had Allison on before about that. That was interesting for sure.
Yeah, definitely a great researcher.
Yeah, I just threw out that Kentucky park because it's all on the same river valley.
Right.
I'm just curious about it, and what that was the Haunted Valley by James K. Jones.
James Jay Jones, right? And I haven't found any other references to that, but it's pretty interesting nonetheless.
Sounds like it.
And Haunted Valley and More Folk Tales of Appalachia.
Yep.
Who is the dude that said something about Phantom Menagerie? I was trying to look that up. I just like the name.
Dr. Donald Omand, Omand. He's the guy that not only exorcised the Loch Ness Monster, but is supposed to have exorcised the Bermuda Triangle. So this guy is no slouch, let me tell you.
I like the name, the Phantom Menagerie.
Yeah, that was his term, I believe.
Yeah. And I'm trying to save these books and things. Wham has some pretty interesting theories on jinn being some of these kind of creatures, which sounds pretty fascinating and possible. How these, jinn and the Middle Eastern lore and wherever they're at over there could be some of these shape-shifting cryptids and things like that. Some weird connections to that. That's pretty fascinating.
Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who of course is no longer with us, she was on that track, and she believed that a lot of these manifestations had to do with the jinn.
Yeah, I can't believe she passed. And then, of course, Linda Godfrey. It's like, come on, man.
I know. All these great minds we've lost. And,
right.
It's just a shame.
There better be a real cool place with all this, hanging out when we croak, waiting on us for sure.
Yeah, well, they're waiting for me.
Yeah,
not the greatest mind. They're thinking, oh, we'll wait a little while on this guy. We'll get some better minds in here first.
There's so many people croaking lately. I'm like, oh gosh, just get mine over with, I guess.
It's a little, you know what? Honestly, Jeffrey, it's a little creepy.
Yeah, it is. I think there's not to get into the conspiracy stuff too heavily, but I think there's some things going on with energy weapons. I've had Robert Duncan on about targeted individuals, and he somehow they took his CIA tech. He was former CIA and took it and used it and abused it, and he whistleblowed on it. I don't try to get too kooky with that stuff, but I think I've heard that Randy Quaid, and I know he's a little kooky, but he's kind of cool kooky at least. Talks about star killers, like there's some kind of like organization that uses this stuff to take out. It seems like they might have had a list sometimes during the last few years, and they were attacking people like with rays.
Hopefully, we're not important enough, all the four of us, to be on that list. They'll think, that'll be second or third wave. We'll get the important guys first.
They just blipped me for saying star killers, so I'm going there. Star killers, bloop.
I don't know this guy. I was just I didn't know anything about it.
But yeah, that Randy Quaid's a trip. He don't act anymore, but I've seen he has like a long beard, and he's definitely. I know his brother Dennis Quaid put out a weird thing about grid down, like some kind of weird documentary about what we're gonna do if the grid goes down, like getting into it. I haven't seen it, but I forget the name of it. But that's pretty creepy too. But everything's just creepy. I mean, every day.
Randy Quaid in a movie called The Last Detail with Jack Nicholson.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I have, but it's been a while.
I was in the Navy, so I got a real kick out of that film. But anyway,
I could watch that again for sure.
Yeah.
Jack's a favorite of mine. I can do some impersonations sometimes if I don't try to. Never rub another man's rhubarb. I can do it better, but I have to get warmed up. Never rub another man's rhubarb. But anyway, it comes and goes. But everything's just crazy. And so many. We've had some people on about the Dogman stuff. That it just seems like every case you've heard about that seemed violent on some level. That's how they like to portray them on the shows and stuff. Like these haunted woods, like everyone's the Dogman trying to eat you, pretty much.
Well, they people that talk about the encounters talk about how a sort of a feeling of evil, something very, very negative, whereas they don't necessarily feel that with an encounter of the Bigfoot. Lee Hampel, again, on his farm near Bray Road, in the vicinity of Elkhorn, he was a mathematician, taught mathematics for years in the schools, a chemist, a scientist. And when he got this farm, and he was producing hay as kind of something to do in his retirement. Some of the locals told him, they said, hey, in those woods back there, there's a werewolf back there. And he's looking at him like, okay, you're nuts. And he told us that he said if he had read Linda Godfrey's books early on, he would have tossed them in the trash. And then he saw it himself. He saw it more than once. He's had missing time more than once. He started putting up these trap cameras. You cannot believe the photographs he has captured. And when Linda Godfrey found out about this, it was like being a kid in a candy store. It's like, here's the stuff she's been writing about. and just miles away is like a laboratory to examine this stuff. So it's he has captured photographs that he thought where it looked like things like portals. He's captured creatures, a strange technology, footprints. It's absolutely mind blowing. I know he was. I think he was in some kind of negotiations to perhaps have a TV show, but that would blow the Skinwalker Ranch off the map. He has tried to get scientists and people from local universities to come there and examine this stuff. And again, this is a several acres of an area where this stuff happens all the time. That a true scientist could come and examine, but they're afraid. You know, they just won't delve into it. It's too weird. It's too I don't know. It's something that would destroy their grants or whatever, I guess. But it's just absolutely when I spoke at the Beast of Bray Road conference a couple times a few years ago, and every time he has people come over in his barn on his property, and he will sit you down for a couple hours and show you just a fraction of the photographs he's taken in this area. And I mean, you get footprints, bizarre footprints, 5-toed footprints that start in the snow nowhere and go to a point and split into two creatures, for crying out loud, and then end nowhere. And some of the bizarre, I don't know what to call it, technology or whatever you see, it's just, it doesn't make any sense. You even see classic UFOs, flying saucers zip around trees. You can tell how fast they're moving from the timestamp. And then also he's had several roadkill deer because he lives on this 2-lane highway. He's pulled them on his property, and he has put a trap camera on them. And several times you will see at night, you'll see a mist form around this carcass. And then the mist is gone, the carcass is gone, and there are no drag marks or footprints. That happened the last time I knew about a dozen times. It is mind blowing. It is just, there's no way to rationally explain it. But it's it's some kind of weird, and also he's tried to, these, whatever these creatures are, they eat bait, they eat roadkill. He has set up trap cameras to try and catch them in the act, but the trap cameras normally fail. He doesn't really capture them, going after the bait and so forth. So it's almost like there's some kind of an intelligence and a technology there that is covering for these things. And why are they there? Are they there to are they constructs somehow to scare people away from this area? Now, if that's what they are, like a Slender Man or a Tulpa or something like that, they're failing miserably because people like us flock to that area to try and see these creatures. But I don't know how to process the parallel, the connection between this types of technology or whatever it seems to be, and these creatures that just act like animals.
Yeah, it's an Anubis Egyptian dogman army of the underworld, Egyptian Ragnarok. That's how I try to look at it.
Well, Linda Godfrey discovered, she was looking at the clusters of these dog band sightings in a portion of southwest Wisconsin. And she also noticed there was I can't remember the name of it, but it's a book that covers the effigy mounds in southern Wisconsin. And she's looking at these two maps, and she thought, my God, when she looked at the effigy mounds, the panther mounds and the spirit mounds almost perfectly lined up to the dogman clusters, the sightings. Now, a panther mound, it looks kind of like if you imagine a panther and you draw a line around it, you get the feet, the head, and the ear a little bit. A spirit mound is very similar, but it seems to be smaller, and the tail is kind of long and pointed. But those two particular effigy mounds seem to, for whatever reason, parallel many of these dogman reports in southern Wisconsin. So the mounds have even Keel, John Keel mentioned the mounds. He wondered, what came first, the strange lights in the sky, or the mounds? What did the people create these mounds, and their I don't know, collective thoughts somehow create these light forms, or did the light forms show up first, and did they create the mounds in sort of a recognition of these strange lights, just a strange phenomena?
Has Hample had any radiation stuff like they have at Skinwalker Ranch? And what do you think about the radiation stuff? That's the big mystery. So the craziness with that.
To the best of my knowledge, he hasn't. And that's really kind of scary and bizarre. And it's not consistent. It's like it will show up sometimes and be very troublesome. And there's other times when it doesn't seem to be there at all. There is the Skinwalker Ranch is just beyond bizarre. I love the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, the original book published by Colin Kelleher and George Knapp. And a lot of people, the TV show, some love it, some hate it. They think, a lot of people tend to think that all this stuff is fake. I don't think it's all fake, but that book is absolutely fascinating. The Black Angus, they were high-end cattle ranchers, and they had the Black Angus bulls penned. I think there were maybe 4 of them. And I remember there was a point when the Shermans were on another part of the ranch, and this is in the midst of all the craziness going on. I mean, UFOs, disembodied voices, poltergeist phenomena. The NIDS team, the National Institute for Discovery Science, Bigelow's group, was there, but not a 24/7 presence. And I remember they were coming back from repairing a fence or something. And Gwen Sherman said, "I pray nothing ever happens to those bulls." And of course, when they got back, the bulls were gone. The pen is all penned up. There's no footprints. And then they found them in that a white trailer right nearby that they had never used. It was on the property when they got there. And Sherman looked through the window. He saw them kind of crammed together. They were alive, but in kind of a stupor. He starts pounding on the door. They wake up. They kick themselves out of this thing, and it takes about 4 hours to corral them again. There are these are the kind of patterns that I find fascinating. There was a series of incredible encounters and sightings in Dyfed, Wales, southwestern Wales, in 1977. And the Coombs family was having a series of bizarre events, and they were cattle ranchers, and they had 100 cattle penned up one night, and the next night they're gone. The pen is all locked up and no footprints or whatever, but and they find them on the Broadmoor farm, which is about a half-mile away. And they said, "Oh well, somebody played a trick on Billy Coombs. They opened the gate. They led of course, when they lead these cattle away, they would have to lead them by the house, the window where they slept in, and then they would have to take them all the way over to the Broadmoor farm and make a 90-degree angle to get there." So that was bizarre. But then the next couple days, he takes 16 of these cows out, puts them in a pen, turns around, goes into the barn to turn on the milk machines, goes back, and the 16 cows are gone. Where are they? The Broadmoor farm again, unharmed, but displaced. And Randolph Pugh and F.W. Holliday, that wrote this book, they saw a lot of interesting parallels between the incidents that were happening on that farm and in that area, that whole area of Dyfed, Wales, and fairy folklore. And they found, and for example, they were seeing these 7-foot tall silver-suited beings, and even these little short guys about 3 feet tall, associated with these egg-shaped objects. And people were contracting some kind of a strange dermatological condition. And so he found that people in Dyfed were also contracting some kind of a strange dermatological condition. This used to be called elf burn or elf disease. So they look at this old Norwegian folklore, and there was something about a milkmaid that had put her cow in the pen, went to get the bucket to milk the cow, and the cow was gone. And this would keep happening to her. Eventually, one of the little people came to her, one of the elementals, and said, "You can't put your cow there. It's spoiling our food." So Pugh and Holiday go on the speculation train. They're not dogmatic about it and wonder, well, perhaps they it has to do with ley lines or that sort of thing. So they devoted a chapter to that. But and then and another pattern. I interviewed Alan Godfrey, and he was a few years ago. He was in 1980. He was a police officer in Todmorden, England, and he was out on a call about these cattle that were in a gated area, and they couldn't figure out how they got in there. And so he thinks it's a joke. So he goes out, he talks to the lady, and she says, "Well, you know what? I may be old, but I'm not crazy." And sure enough, and she had seen some kind of a strange light disappear over the hill. And sure enough, these cows somehow got over this little river and were in this gated area. And then Godfrey is on his way back to the precinct. He sees a classic, I'm going to call it a flying saucer, and he even sketches it. And so he gets back to the precinct. Later on, he realizes he's missing about a half an hour. So within the next few months, he sets up a situation where he can be regressively hypnotized. And he goes through this experience. He doesn't, even under hypnosis, he doesn't know how he got on board this craft, but he got on board somehow. He was talking to a tall, normal, human-looking guy that called himself, dressed in white robes, that called himself Yosef. He was surrounded by a bunch of these little guys with he called them like flashlight eyes. He said they were so ugly he couldn't look at them. I don't know if they were grays or whatever. But he's under hypnosis. He's going through this process of describing what he's seeing. And then all of a sudden he says, "There's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous." And he described this large black dog about the size of a German Shepherd on board what, a spaceship? So when you get these bizarre connections, patterns, parallels, I'm not sure how much it teaches us, except that it teaches us that these things are not straightforward. They're not that easy to understand. So those kinds of things I find absolutely fascinating.
Said flashing eyes, and it made me think of one of my encounters that I had at one point. I was in a house and there was UFO activity, and something was in my windows with flashing like lights in the windows, and it was almost like did they have headgear? I don't know what it was, but it was like weird flashing lights and things moving weird in the windows, and it was like, I guess, little aliens. I don't know what the hell it was, but at one point I saw some small cloaked beings in the woods, 3 of them with a friend standing, and they were very small and skinny in cloaks. You couldn't see their faces. I was like skinny. I always said skinny Jawas, but there was a black box in front of them, and I've wondered if that was what was in the windows with the flashing like headgear. But the weird thing is there was a witness, and a black cat jumped towards them, and they vanished. And it was just when you said the flashing lights, I started thinking about those lights flashing in the windows with the flashing eyes, and gave me chills, which I don't know if they were the same being, but things can trigger you for sure.
Well, I've never had an experience quite like that. And I'm happy that I haven't had an experience quite like that.
Yeah, they can be scary for sure. So what other cryptids out there? Is anything else really weird caught your attention? Any other kind of cryptids or stories?
I guess again, back to patterns, we sort of have the tradition of how many hundreds of cases of close proximity of some kind of a craft or light or whatever seems to affect the combustion engine of a vehicle, and it stalls. There are several other things that seem to do that. There was a case in Northumberland, England, where Dorothy Strong, I think it was about 1960, she's in a taxi cab, and the cab stalls. The fare meter goes crazy, and they feel like they're being hit by some kind of a force field. And they look out the window, and they see it's like a phantom army is marching toward them. And as it gets toward the vehicle, the army disappears. And they know it's the Battle of Otterburn from 1388 because it has manifested before. And eventually it fades away, and the car starts again. And then so there's even cases where the close proximity of cryptids. Stan Gordon has talked about a couple of them in Pennsylvania in 73, 74, where the close proximity of a Bigfoot seems to, maybe it's a coincidence, but the car would stall at the same time. The classic case is a guy named W.D. Doc Priestley in about mid-60s, I guess. He's cruising along the 2-lane near Marlington, West Virginia, near the state forest. And his car stalls, rolls to a stop. He wonders, what the heck? This thing has been running just fine. And he looks over to his left, and there's a classic Bigfoot standing there. So his buddies that are way ahead of him in a hunting bus realize he's not there, and they come back. And Mr. Bigfoot decides to recede back into the woods. Priestley can start his car again. He takes off. I don't know how far he got. He didn't say anything to his buddies, by the way. I don't know how far he got, but all of a sudden, his car starts to stall again. His engine starts sparking. His engine actually burns out. And he looks over to his left, and there's the either the same Bigfoot or his kissing cousin standing there. Now, he says nothing about this incident, about the Bigfoot, until months later, because he wanted to come back to that area and go hunting with his buddies. He figured if he told his buddies that a Bigfoot stalled his car somehow, or that he saw a Bigfoot, they wouldn't show up. So he just shut up about it and told them about it later. Now my favorite vehicle stoppage of all time goes back to the late 1800s, early 1900s. Elliot O'Donnell was he was a paranormal investigator of his time, wrote a lot of books, and one called Ghostland. He talks about his uncle by marriage. He calls Mr. B, and they're cruising along a haunted road going toward Limerick Island, and he's being driven by his servant named, get this, Dunkley. Now, if I'm going to make up a tale, I am not going to use the name Dunkley. I'm going to come up with something a little more believable. But anyway, they're cruising along, and one horse and a small carriage, and all of a sudden this thing stops dead. And Mr. B turns around, he looks at Dunkley. Dunkley is in kind of a stupor. He's got a look of terror on his face. Mr. B looks down and he sees these little shadowy, translucent figures swarming the cart. And he doesn't see any features or anything like that. And then he turns around, grabs the reins, breaks the spell, and they get out of there. They get some distance away. Dunkley comes out of it, and he asked him, he said, what happened? What were you seeing? And Dunkley said, in his mind's eye, he saw a troop of dancing fairies and making merry. And apparently when you come across the elementals, the fairies, and they're making merry, they don't like it. So they looked very angry. And from his perspective, they were climbing on the cart. They were trying to pull him off. And this poor guy was terrified. Now, it's just interesting that they had a shared experience, but they perceived it differently. Now, I don't know if this story is true or not, but we have many, many cases where people have shared experiences with UFOs or whatever, and they don't, the experience is not identical. Even Betty and Barney Hill, they had that shared experience, but not everything was absolutely the same. Even the description of the aliens, Barney said that they had sort of slits for noses. Betty said their noses look more like Jimmy Durante noses. Now, you kids out there may not know who Jimmy Durante was, but Google that guy, and you'll know that his nose was quite a bit different than a couple of slits. So it's these kind of patterns I just find absolutely fascinating. And John Keel talked about these window areas where, in a specific area, it seemed like different types of phenomena would occur in the same general area over several years sometimes.
Well, Steve, John Keel and Mary Hyre went out for drives. They were together. Weren't they in the car together when they were doing the turning on the headlights and communicating with a UFO?
They would go. There was an area south of Point Pleasant, the TNT area at the time. You'd have hundreds of people lining up to go in there, and you had a lot of good old boys with their rifles and bow and arrows, thinking they're going to bag a Mothman. So they found an area several miles south of there called Gallipolis Ferry. And back even now, you go back in those hollers, and it's kind of desolate back there. I can imagine what it was like half a century ago. So they would go down there. There was a particular farmhouse where the owners would kill the lights about 9 o'clock, and so they would go there afterwards and park, and they would find all kinds of bizarre, strange lights going overhead. I mean, this area was so active at the time, and there was a time when Keel had his, what was it, 6-cell, one of those big 6-cell flashlights you used to be able to get. He would flash Morse code at them. He would flash descend, and this thing would descend. And so the whatever these lights were would respond to his thought, his actions with the flashlight. And even he would go a little further south there. There's an area called the Chief Cornstalk Hunting Grounds. Of course, Chief Cornstalk was the historical figure that was a peacemaker and was betrayed and murdered back during the war. But Keel saw a bunch of these purple lights, and he talks about them in the Mothman Prophecies. There's a lecture he gives where he talks more about them, that they actually came down and responded to his flashlight. They surrounded him and kind of spun around him, whatever these things were, almost as if they were living. And he actually, he saw and looking down on one of the hills into the hollers, he saw an area that was all lit up in purple lights. And so a day or so later, he talked to one of the farmers in that area, asked him about the purple glowing lights in that area. And he said, yeah, I've seen them before. And I don't go in there because I had a dog that ran in there once and I never saw him again. So this area was filled with just all kinds of, I was just a kid in junior high, man. I couldn't drive. I couldn't play UFO investigator or anything like that. So I had to live years later vicariously through John Keel's writings. But yeah, it was just such a hot spot of activity.
Yeah. John and Mary seem like they were pretty similar in reporting what they saw. It didn't seem like they disagreed on a lot of things. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was just kind of working on that. What you were talking about with the shared experiences. It seemed like John and Mary had a excellent working relationship there for about a year.
Yeah. Keel, when he first met her, he came down from New York, and it was early December, and he'd heard about these Mothman sightings, which at first he thought was just a big bird, an unusual bird, and they brought in a bunch of the original witnesses, and he met Mary Hyre. He said at first he kind of had her pegged as kind of the local busybody, but he rejected that right afterwards. He spoke very highly of Mary Hyre, thought she was just a very high quality person. So the only thing that they disagreed, well, I don't even know if I call it a disagreement. Keel kept a lot of these specifics about what people were experiencing very close to his vest. And there was one time when he and Mary Hyre were talking to a guy on a farm that had some strange experiences. And she started talking about these weird footprints they had seen. and Keel kind of cut her off. He did not want people to know too much about what he had found. He did not want hoaxers to come to him and repeat the same kind of things and make it sound like they had a real experience. But that was the only sort of a disagreement they had. He was just very, very, very careful about letting these things out. He had an experience. He went over to Gallipolis across the river in Ohio. He would do this thing where he would just randomly knock on doors and ask people if they'd had any strange experiences. And he went to this one door. Remember the film Mothman Prophecies in the beginning? Who was it? The guy that played I can't think of the actor's name now, but he
Bill Kuselis?
What's that?
Was it Bill Kuselis, the famous actor?
No,
I can't remember. That's one I need to watch again that I know I enjoyed, but I can't remember it.
Well, in the beginning, the guy, Richard Gere, comes to the door and he says, "All right, that's the same guy," and he pulls him in with a shotgun. Well, that was loosely based on a real incident. Keel would go to randomly to knock on doors because he would have people come to him with their stories, and sometimes they were just BS. So he goes to the store, and the guy has a shotgun, and he told him to get the hell out of here. And Keel was shocked, and so he brought Mary Hyre back later because everybody knew Mary, and the guy kind of sheepishly said, "Well, I got a phone call before you came here from a guy that I thought was my friend, but it was not him, it turned out. And whoever this voice said, there's a crazy man coming to your door, get rid of him." So it was just bizarre. It wasn't his friend, and who knows what it was or what happened, but it was just. And then once they straightened that out, this guy talked about how he had seen some kind of a light or saucer or something in his backyard, and it burned out his electrical box in the barn. And so, there was a whole series of bizarre incidents, and he saw some strange footprints on the ground, which Mary Hyre started to say, "Well, we've seen some footprints like that," and Keel cut her off because he didn't want too much information to come out about what they were finding. He didn't want it to come back as some kind of a hoax. So, but yeah, it was. There are elements of the film that are loosely based on what really happened.
I need to watch that one again. There's a good one if you get a chance. There's Something in the Barn. It's about I think this American family goes to Norway, and it looks like one of the yard gnomes that you see in people's yards, but it lives in their barn, and they upset it like gremlins.
Oh.
Gremlins situation happens, but it's called There's Something in the Barn. It's on Netflix, I think.
Okay.
But really a good horror movie that surprised me. It's funny too. But definitely the cases that, that's the main reason I got into this, is seeing the stuff. If it wasn't for that, I would have never. My interest in it before that was like E.T. That was about the only thing I knew of, stuff like that. I didn't think about it except in movies or something. But then when you really see it, it opens up a whole new world for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt about it, that you never get rid of. But I was looking up Lee Hampel. He's in a lot of radio show appearances. I don't think he has a book, but I have to see if there's some documentaries and stuff for sure, and check that out. I know what's that? I got that book recently, Merging Dimensions, about Bradshaw.
Yes, fascinating book. Bradshaw and come on, Tom Dongo.
Yeah. That's crazy for sure.
Yeah.
Is that the place on Skinwalker Ranch or beyond where the lady goes there and as a kid voices talk to her, and then she goes back as an adult with them, and then they come like these weird voices talk? That may have been. I get the ranches mixed up.
I think that was a different ranch, but this was known as the Bradshaw Ranch, and it mirrors the Skinwalker Ranch to a great deal. Strange entities, Bigfoot type creatures, UFOs, missing time, and so forth.
Bigelow.
And, there's an updated version, and it's just fascinating. Tom Dongo is a very, very Interesting guy.
Is that the one Bigelow used to own too, or is that a different one?
I
There's another one he owned. I know.
I know. I'm not sure. There is another one he did own, but
It's
I
one of
wouldn't be.
those.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't be shocked if Bigelow had owned the. I don't think so. I think the military got their hands on the Bradshaw Ranch, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. But yeah, there's so many. I haven't watched the new season of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. I need to watch the new season. I love when the Navajo police guy appears. I forget his name, but he was also in Unsolved Mysteries with all the weird coins that would pop up. The police dude, John Dover or something. Is that what his name is? I can't remember. I'm terrible with names. But the native dude, the Navajo dude. But he was on the actual Skinwalker episode on Beyond Skinwalker Ranch when they went up there and Satan's butt or whatever, Butte, right. Satan's butt, Satan's butt. But yeah, I know one thing I wanted to ask you. I've seen in a lot of these shows, and of course, a lot of the shows are crap, but like Paranormal Caught on Camera, I think some of the stuff may be real, but you just don't know. But there's been a lot of weird footage of like a bald entity that kind of looks like Nosferatu meets Gollum, and it keeps popping up on these different shows, and it looks like an albino kind of deteriorated Uncle Fester or something. But they seem to say it's like Wendigo or something. But there was one on Paranormal Caught on Camera, I think it was Skinwalker in Arizona, where these kids had a camera on a hunting rifle scope, and somehow they were broadcasting it to the other people there, and one of them walks across that Wendigo weird pale thing, walks, and they see it and it doesn't see them, but the video is very compelling, and it could be fake, I don't know, but I think it may be real because there's weird stuff like different layers in that footage, and it's on the last season of Paranormal Caught on Camera. But anyway, there's in one section there's some dogs running around in the field, like it's a whole just broad shot of many fields, and then suddenly this little weird, not little, it looks like a weird, like I said, a Nosferatu walks through the woods, and it doesn't see them. But here's the weird thing about the footage: coyotes are following it, and it's the creepiest. That footage haunted me, and it could be fake as hell, but it could be real. I don't know. I think they have a little bit of everything on there. I don't trust it for sure, but that footage, for some reason, I was thinking about it late into the night. But have you seen anything come up with the bald Nosferatu things that they keep showing? Like, is there anything?
No, I haven't, and I have to tell you that I am a hard-nosed skeptic with photographs and footage.
Yeah.
With CGI and AI and people out there that have absolutely no morals. I just think that I'm just very, very cautious, But no, I have not seen that, and that sounds pretty damn creepy.
Yeah, they associate it with Wendigo somehow. That's what they usually call it on those kind of shows. But I'd like to find that footage online. If I ever do, I'll send it to you or something. Okay. But it's definitely weird.
Steve, since the Mothman sightings happened over 50 years ago, there wasn't the Photoshop AI that you just mentioned. So if you're just going by people's reports, how realistic was that lengthy experience for the town of Point Pleasant? Is it like, how believable is it?
Credible, I think. Keel got a little over 100 reports from people that had nothing to gain. People that, I talked to a lady one time sitting out in front of the Mothman Museum, and she said, back in those days, you just didn't, if you had an experience like this, you just didn't talk about it because people were going to brand you as someone that's crazy. And so the people that came forward were, hesitant. They were credible, and the descriptions generally matched. 6-7 foot tall, humanoid, red glowing eyes, 10-foot wingspan. Now, some people saw something a little different. Some people just saw a big ugly bird. Tom Urey saw a classic thunderbird. He said 10 to 12 foot wingspan, and it was just like a large bird. But he said, look, it wasn't an eagle, it wasn't an osprey, it wasn't this and wasn't that. The people were, I think, very credible that reported these things. I mean, you look at Marcella Bennett, and she was so shocked she actually dropped her infant child when they were out there visiting a friend that lived on the in the TNT area. I've spoken to a few of the original witnesses. So yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that they experienced something extraordinary.
You just mentioned yeah, you know, you just relate that story when the Scarberries got into town after Mothman's flying over their car at 100 miles an hour and bouncing off the roof. Aren't their reports to the police department pretty characteristic of someone who just had an unexplainable incident, fast talking, their patterns of behavior seem like they would happen only after some really unusual event, and that's documented at the museum.
Right. They
in the letter you can.
Right. In Jeff's book, they separated them. They wrote out their experiences and they matched. There are three of the four are in the museum. I think Steve Mallett's is not there, but yeah, they actually they saw this thing near the old North Power Plant out in the TNT area. Linda Scarberry said, "What's that man doing standing in the middle of the road?" And then that man spread his wings by 10 feet. They saw the red eyes, and it kind of shuffled off toward the old North Power Plant. They took off. It followed it into town. I just recently had a chance to talk to Roger Scarberry, the guy that drove the car. He's been silent for about half a century. He came to Jeff maybe a month and a half ago and said, Jeff, I'm ready to tell you what the experience was. I've heard so many different stories about what happened that aren't true. I want to set the record straight. So I was in on part of that interview, not the whole thing. And Jeff is going to write it up in his next book. But here is Roger Scarberry, the guy that drove the car nearly 100 miles an hour, trying to get away from that thing. And when the day that Jeff talked to him, and then they set up the interview for the next day, Jeff said to him, Roger, just tell me this. Did it really happen? And Roger said, it scared the hell out of us. So I had talked to him. I talked to Linda Scarberry several times before she died. Steve and Mary Mallett had been quiet. There's another individual, I don't know if I can reveal the name, that was mentioned in the Mothman prophecies that is supposed to be coming forward, and Jeff Wamsley may have already interviewed. But of course, there's Linda Sigmund, who came forward about 2016 about her experience back in 1967 with her boyfriend, saw some strange lights, actually saw this creature and had missing time. Faye DeWitt, who's been around, she's the lady you will see on some of the documentaries that says it had the biggest, reddest eyes you ever did see. And a great lady. She saw it when she was young. Her brother thought it was a big joke, so he drove out to the Old North Power Plant, and they saw the damn thing. So I have been able to speak to several original witnesses, and
Nice.
and I don't know what they experienced, but it was something.
Hey, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, in Jeff's book, we do have a copy of the handwritten letter, and it's transcript in print over on the next page, and
Right.
Hopefully the viewers can see the right above my finger where in this testimony, the eyewitness account says we all agreed we'd like to talk to a minister about it. That seems pretty characteristic of a traumatic event. So it just goes back to what you said. There's more. A lot of the people are very credible,
Right.
and I just don't know how you fake all these behaviors, and 20, 30 years later, as like profiling and more scientific evidence is assembled to look at eyewitness accounts, and you say, well, this person's putting on a hoax because of these lack of behaviors. We can go back to what the Scarberries and Mallets were reporting, and it's all fitting in with the typical behaviors of someone who went through some kind of unusual event.
Right.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to play this video, not the whole thing. It's like a minute. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I just want y'all to see it real quick. It's a lot clearer when you watch it on the television show compared to this copy, but it's definitely weird.
Oh, what the crap? Is that a guy? What the frick?
They're hunting.
What was
Somehow
that?
Skinwalker's
walking creepy. Dude, that was a skinwalker. What?
Hold on.
Watch again.
Show it again. Watch.
As the coyotes disappear into some brush. Moments later, an oddly shaped humanoid figure emerges.
Oh, what the crap? Is that a guy? What the frick? What was that?
My name is TJ, and this is my video.
Let me go back.
To me, it looked like a tall person figure. Like, I would have guessed that it was 7 feet tall or so, and it just had, like, disproportionately long arms.
Oh, what the crap? Is that a guy? What the frick?
So, off the bat, I was confused and just trying to figure out, like, what could that have been?
What was that?
He's walking creepy.
Dude, that was a skinwalker. What?
Being from Utah, there's actually a place here called Skinwalker Ranch.
Very creepy.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I don't know if it's real, but it's pretty damn good. They ought to be doing horror movies and shit if it's real. If it ain't real. I think it might be, but I don't know. But that one's out of all the footage I've seen on these shows, and I'm skeptical like you with them, and I've seen stuff. I don't trust shows, but that is a weird one for sure.
Yeah.
Mostly because it has different layers going on. Like there's coyotes and there's like dogs in another part. Like they're getting a whole broad shot of all this stuff happening. So definitely a weird one for sure. Gave me chills.
and I was nowhere near there, just for the record.
I know, right? Yeah, that was me. Yeah, but definitely weird. Like some kind of, I don't know. They've showed the similar thing before in a surveillance video. A family got at supposedly in their yard, and it was like a similar thing that looked kind of weirder walking, but very similar. So I don't know. There might be something out there. And albino Uncle Fester Nephilim.
You do hear these reports from people occasionally of something that doesn't fit any category of cryptid or entity. And these things show up once in a while. And it's hard to know what to make of them.
Wham, have you seen any reports in New York similar to what we're discussing?
Well, what part of what you're discussing?
Flying humanoids.
There have been a few. Not for a while, but I guess it would have been back in, it was about 2012 through 2014. There was kind of a cluster of a lot. There were a number of like Bigfoot kinds of things being reported in Dutchess County and Columbia County. And a lot of them were kind of classic Bigfoot things, although Bigfoot stuff around in the Hudson Valley is always kind of weird. It's never kind of standalone. It's always accompanied by weird lights and poltergeist experiences by people who witness it. So it's always part of a larger set of reports. But in this one instance, there was a guy and several other people who his farm was a focus of a lot of this. He and his neighbors, and they lived right at the boundary between Dutchess County and Columbia County. So it was far north Dutchess County, and that's a fairly rural area. The farms are very large. There's a lot of kind of mixed forest meadow kinds of, that's kind of the terrain. And this is on the east side of the Hudson River, so the Catskills are on the other side. So it isn't mountainous right there, and there were several reports around this farm that was kind of a center of it, of several people reporting that they witnessed what appeared to be like a Bigfoot-like creature. Like they would see it and then it would suddenly rise up in the air. It didn't have wings, but that it would just suddenly rise up in the air and then kind of swoop around. And everybody there were like 4 or 5 accounts of this. And everybody who saw it, that just freaked them out, like they would run into the house, because they were afraid that it was going to like fly at them or something, And so they didn't really see kind of like where it went or anything like that. But that's the only thing like that I have heard of, or, from around the Hudson Valley. There have been a lot of other things, a lot of UFO things, a lot of UFO clusters, Bigfoot stuff in various places. You guys were talking about patterns. One of the things that I looked at when I wrote my book about the Hudson Valley is there do seem to be patterns of a certain odd kind. If, for example, if you go back in history, you'll find that, at the time when the pine bush stuff was going on, which is sort of in the southwestern part of the valley, while that was all going on down there, way up north, around Hudson and Kinderhook, there were Bigfoot things going on around there. And then it'll shift and UFO stuff will show up in another place and other things will happen. It's like it shifts around, but there does seem to be a phenomenon in which when one thing happens in one part of the valley, another bunch of stuff happens in another part of the valley. But we're talking about, a valley that from its total length is almost 300 miles long. So people don't correlate that stuff. It's sort of like you have to see it from above and see it, and you see a timeline, where you can see that these things are actually kind of happening at the same time, just in different parts of the valley. And since UFO folks and Bigfoot folks have tended not to hang out together, and ghost hunters do their own thing. You know what I mean? Since they don't seem to talk to each other very much, they don't really see that large set of patterns, and they're all interested in their own little bailiwick of things. So, and there's always hauntings going on, and they seem to happen sort of in clusters too. I mean, there are places where people see lots of things frequently, and then there'll be like a flutter of other poltergeist things happening in another place. It's very odd. I wish that I had like a living database and I could just sort of try to plot stuff. But basically, in order to come up with these patterns, you have to talk to lots of different people from different communities and try to pull it all together. And it's, if I didn't have to work, that's probably what I would do. But I have to work, so I don't have time to do that. So
you're right. Some Bigfoot people don't want to hear. I don't want to hear about the light you saw in the sky. I want to hear about your Bigfoot, and vice versa. I don't want to hear about seeing Bigfoot. I want to know about the flying saucer from Alpha Centauri. So and there's a lot of high strangeness. So even Ron Moorhead out in the Sierra Nevadas discovered that when they were capturing the so-called Sierra sounds. So there's just these bizarre connections that are important, I think.
And that's, to me, is the sort of the whole point sort of John Keel's book, The Mothman Prophecy, for example, because I mean, I read that book when I was, in the 70s when it first came out. It scared the crap right out of me. Of course, I came from a particular religious background, so it did. That was the only frame of reference I had for some of what he was talking about, but I don't have that frame of reference anymore. But he talks about that, how it's like this stuff all kind of piggybacks on each other, and you need to take it as a whole. That's why he referred to areas like that as window areas. Right. These were areas where all this stuff seems to sort of accumulate and gather, and it happens in clusters. I mean, I would say that in the Hudson Valley, there probably is something going on all the time somewhere. But if I were to just if I had a way to track it and connect all the different people that I've had to talk to in order to, in order to put my book together, to talk to, I don't know, I had several hundred people from different, groups. But there does seem to be something going on, like a lot most of the time. But people here at the Hudson Valley are actually kind of used to it. They kind of expect stuff to happen. So they also don't talk about it very much. So you have to get them to talk about it, because there's this kind of social expectation that weird crap just happens in some places. And so it's just part of the life. It's almost part of the kind of lifestyle. And this is for people who live in the Hudson Valley, who've, or I guess you would say native to the Hudson Valley. They're not tourists, they're not people who've recently moved, that kind of thing. So it's kind of its own culture in that way. I don't know if those places around Point Pleasant and around Ohio, I know that there are places in Ohio that are like that, because I have friends who live in Ohio, in certain places in Ohio, that they talk about how so many weird things have happened in these places that the people that just have lived there for generations just kind of accept it. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's just, well, yeah, so and so saw something. Yeah, well, there you go. You still have to, like, do the chores in the morning and go to work. Even if you've had some odd experiences. So
Keel really dived into it in his book Operation Trojan Horse,
right,
where he pulls all
exactly.
these things together. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good book. In fact, weren't there things in that book that he had to pull out and then he included in the Eighth Tower?
That was the Mothman prophecies. The editors decided to cut out about half of the Mothman prophecies
Right.
and leave it
Okay.
on the cutting room floor, but he preserved about 2/3 of that in the Eighth Tower.
Right.
So it's a
Because I think the Eighth Tower has got some really weird stuff in it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I remember that's like one of my favorite of his. It's because he's got some really weird stuff in it.
Well, he was way ahead of everybody when he was writing this material.
Yeah.
Hey, everybody, we got about 3 minutes. It's been an excellent show. We appreciate it so much, Steve Ward, a wealth of information and stories. And I love hearing new stories I haven't heard before. I'd never heard of Lee Hampel, so I want to get him on at some point. That sounds like
he's a fascinating guy.
For sure. Do you have any links or anything you want to share?
Not really. I'm on I have the High Strangeness Factor podcast. Been around for about 5.5 years on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. You can find me on Facebook, Steve Ward. If you type in Steve Ward at Point Pleasant, you'll probably find me. I'm also I do a show on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files. They call me a correspondent. I don't know what the hell a correspondent is, but it's a fun show. So that's and I end up on a lot of shows like this, kind of doing a lot of times Mothman 101, so to speak. And it's always fascinating. It's always interesting. And I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Thanks so much. I sent you the link to that weird video if you want to look at it again.
Okay, great.
But all right, everybody. Listen to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans. Thanks, Wham. Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Steve. And one thing, check out this book, You Better Watch Out. It's a new book coming out October 15th by James S. Murray and Darren Waremount from HarperCollins. It's a Christmas book about a serial killer. Apparently that dude, James S. Murray, is one of the dudes on that Impractical Jokers show, the little skinny dude. I forget his name on there, but I think he goes by a different name than James S. Murray on there. I haven't watched it in a long time, but check it out. You better watch out. And next week, Charles Liu, Quantum Physics. From Visible Ink Press, a real doctor on quantum physics. And after that, it's that Jim Morrison show. And then, Mark, if you want to sit on that, just let me know. That's up to you. If not, it's no problem. But if you
I don't mind. Paul's an excellent guest.
Yeah, just we'll let you sit in. Jay will be there too. And then that last show is the Halloween show. And then there's someone when Wham comes back, Evelyn, I need to make sure I sent you that book in PDF about the Celtic tradition. Like she wrote a Celtic Druid book. I think I sent it to you. I have to double check. But everybody have a good weekend. We appreciate it so much. And thanks for listening. Remember, we have a Facebook group, Church of Mabus Radio. And everybody have a good weekend. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Have a good night, all.
All right.